This is the Birth, Baby, and Life podcast with Kristen Burgess, and we're going to talk about women, abortion, and the reality of limits, in episode number 202. Hi, Mama. We are going to talk about abortion, women, bringing forth new life, limits in this very heavy podcast episode. So if this is something that you feel like would be difficult for you to listen to, you may want to skip this podcast episode. But I feel like this is one that I have needed to record for a while, especially with the recent episodes where I've explored motherhood and meaning and pregnancy and birth as a rite of passage, and even looking at pronatalism and those sorts of stances. It's just important to get a little bit more nuanced, and so I wanted to take an episode to talk about that. If you don't know me, my name is Kristen. I am a pregnancy coach. I work with mamas all over the world, helping them to enjoy healthy pregnancies, to grow healthy babies, and to have beautiful births and beginnings for their little ones. Now, again, as per usual, I do have a lot of notes, so you'll see me look down at those. And in this episode, I really feel like it's important to try and convey some of the nuance and deliberation that I've put into this episode. A few episodes ago, I talked about mothering as a project, and I mentioned that there is a progressive agenda that kind of sees babies as an impediment that are in the way of some level of material success or freedom. And that for this agenda, abortion is an important option that can help preserve women's freedoms. And I used language that I think hurt some women, and I wanted to apologize for that and for the unintended hurt there. And I also felt like I should come back and explore this topic because it's a really explosive, incredibly devastating topic. And I feel like it needs to be explored with some level of nuance and at least some level of respect for the heaviness that it is, not being used as a political tool or weaponized, but really looked at on a deep level for, kind of for these implications that have come for women or that are put forth for women in relation to it. Now, I titled this episode "The Sword Is Not with the Goddess," which is the title of a thought piece that was written by the late midwife Janine Pavardi Baker, who began as a supporter of abortion and throughout her career ended up changing her perspective, especially as she explored more in the realm of conscious conception and bringing forth new lives. And I wanted to read a couple of quotes from her to start off this episode just because I feel like they're thought-provoking. So she said, "How can we wonder that so many parents are infertile and births are problematic when millions of fetuses are being aborted all around us? Are our babies afraid to come to us when our culture is so irreverent to life?" And I would differ from Janine a little bit because I don't know that I think it's irreverence for life that has shifted much of the culture. I think more it's a fear, and a fear of limits and a fear of oppression, and I really feel like much of this is fear-based. And so I think that some perhaps of the peddlers of fear, which are people who have an agenda that they want to see brought forth, there's an irreverence for life in them. But I think many of the people who are kind of caught up in the fray don't have that same irreverence for life. And I also feel like some of the infertility and struggles that we have are based on poor nutrition and that sort of thing overall. But I do feel like there's a level of naivete or even hiding of the reality of pregnancy and birth and biology. And as we explored in the pronatalism episodes, that many women just don't realize that there may come a point in time that it's too late. And so some of that can be chalked up to these perspectives that are kind of cavalier about life, to say the least. And then Janine goes on to say, "It is our disgrace that we tacitly or overtly support abortion under the guise of freedom of choice. It smokescreens the glaring inadequacies of culture," and I do think she's exactly right here. the glaring inadequacies of a culture out of balance with the feminine life-sustaining powers. It masks the blight of poverty in a society where so many make do with too much and far more don't have enough. It strengthens our anti-child attitudes and builds up the cult of ego. Abortion serves primarily the industry which performs it. It doesn't necessarily build self-esteem in the aborting mothers or make them feel more powerful for exercising their freedom of choice. Abortion lets a little more bondage into our culture, those chains which limit our freedoms, and it most certainly makes for the ultimate oppression of the most vulnerable members of our world, the unborn. It is like the total identification with the aggressor. For millennia, women have oppressed, and now we are beginning to change that, and we in turn oppress an even lower class of people, children, because the etymology of fetus is unborn child. And again, that was Janine Pavardi Baker's words, and she wrote an entire essay on this, which I will link in the show notes so that you can read, because she puts a lot of nuance and thought into it. But I do believe that we really overlook some of the systemic problems as we promote abortion as the solution to everything. So instead of looking at poverty, instead of looking at limits that are placed on women and children, or opportunities that are available for them, we say that abortion is the answer. We say that women can transcend these limits as long as they don't have children in tow. And I think that that is a mistake. And I'll link to Janine's work. I'll also link to Feminists for Life, because they have a lot of discourse on this very topic about being pro-woman, but not necessarily pro-abortion, which is an interesting tack to take in today's day and age. But I think it's just a really profound thought to look at, are we kind of trying to hide issues that we haven't addressed by touting that abortion is the solution to all issues when it really doesn't seem to be. So in the last podcast episode, we talked about archetypal perspectives that humans have had throughout history. And one of those archetypes that we looked at was maiden, mother, and crone. And I mentioned then that today our society seems to really only celebrate the maiden. There is only this desire to be the unfettered woman who can go forth and do whatever she can. And, I want to say here that I'm sensitive to the fact that there are times when a pregnancy cannot continue safely. For example, an ectopic pregnancy, or, if a baby has passed away in the womb and is not doing very poorly, and it's just not going to work out. My mom had an ectopic pregnancy. And so there are reasons, women who have cancer, there are reasons why carrying a pregnancy could be devastating to the life of a mother. And I have never been opposed to that situation, nor do you ever find doctors, for example, Catholic doctors who are pro-life, who would refuse to treat a woman in that situation. I feel like in the last months, in the United States at least, we see a lot of headlines about fear of doctors for treating moms for this, that, and the other. And some of those situations, I think, have been brought up just by the political climate, where somebody is saying, oh, you need to worry, in a situation where a doctor never in the past would have hesitated or worried. So I honestly think that some of these limits are artificially created now because they're good tools to say that one person is too radical or not. And so I think that we have to be careful to be discerning in those situations. And I also want to be sensitive to the fact that women like my mom, who had a situation like an ectopic pregnancy or a similar situation, that that's a situation of pregnancy loss and mourning. And it's different than a situation where a woman is being told that your life is going to be over if you carry this child. You just need to do something about that. And I think often those women feel pushed into a corner too. And so I want to be sensitive to the fact that this is a very, very complex situation, but I don't think that we do any favors by not looking at it or talking about it, and not acknowledging the fact that right now our society tells women that success comes when you are this unfettered maiden who is not burdened, or for whom all the stars have aligned exactly right, and then you can have the baby. I was having a discussion with one of my children the other day talking about their peer group, and there's all this fear, and there's all this economic and political uncertainty, and so, well, we can't, people can't have kids now. And I hear what they're saying, and as we see, the economic uncertainty and world events and that sort of thing have definitely impacted fertility rates. But I also think that, there comes a time when we need to ask ourselves if the script that we're being told, the script being, you won't have freedom or financial success or whatever if you have children or too many children, but usually it's children at all, or you can't have children yet if you want these things, and you can't have children yet because of this, that, and the other. That's all an external locus of control rather than an internal locus of control, which, as I discussed, especially in the last episode, this ability to look at yourself and your self-image and reshape yourself and to make yourself who you want to be, that's really an internal locus of control. So we see these really, really, really conflicting worldviews or just ways of being in the world that are being presented and kind of spoon-fed, especially to women. And I think we need to talk about those and be critical of them or taking them at face value. I think there's also a fear of the power of women. What if fears about women in the past was not because just of their power to heal, but also their power to heal and their power to stop life. I ended last week's episode by talking about how I think men find it a bit intimidating that women walk into chaos and they come out carrying life. And this is one of the things that Janine Parvati Baker says, is she wonders if sometimes women healers in the past were seen with suspicion because they maybe also helped for women to stop life. And so I think that all of women's powers are held up in birth and life, and also the choice not to have life. And I think that makes it a really heavy topic and also a really sacred topic, and a topic that we as women especially should look at, not just at face value, not just with what we're being told, but looking at it for the heaviness, because this isn't cardiac activity. This isn't clumps of cells. This is literally the life force that we hold within our bodies and our choice on what to do with that, and really understand the magnitude of that choice. I really feel like women are fed a raw deal today. I mean, male sexuality is the new normal. If you look at the quote-unquote hookup culture, and if you look at what we've gotten is that women are supposed to sex in the city, they're supposed to sleep all around, they're supposed to do all of this. That is the lifestyle of a hypersexual male, like a player. And yet somehow that's what we as women are supposed to take on and be empowered by, even though from a biological perspective, women are very different in how they bond and mate and even view sex. So we're supposed to all of a sudden be players and be fulfilled by that. And it just doesn't make sense, because, you've got your playboys up here, which is like this subset of men who are hypersexual, and they're probably really happy with the new status quo. But are we really, really doing a favor to women? And I've got a book that I'll link in the show notes that really talks about this very eloquently. And really our service that we're being sold, or what we're being told, is that life is about material gain, and it's about what you can get. We live in service not to life, but we live in service to ourselves and to what we can gain materially. And our success is defined by our career success, as if there's not really anything beyond that. Or at the most, it's like career and wellness and like personal fulfillment. So if you have a great career and you go to yoga classes, you've reached like the zenith of human existence. That seems kind of shallow to me. And these same people will be the people who rail against the capitalistic system. Yet that's the system that you're holding up as the standard, like this freedom and money to do whatever you want, to be whoever you want, unfettered by anybody. And so there's a cognitive dissonance there. And again, I think women are being sold a short stick. Children are seen as a hindrance to life. They're not seen as a blessing anymore. That's one of the things that I marvel about when I hear young people say, I'm never having kids. It's like, children are a blessing, right? I mean, if we look at, for example, if you're coming from a faith-based perspective, which I am, we're told there are 3 great blessings throughout the scriptures. One is health, one is wealth, and the third is children. They're part of that. And having them and experiencing joy with them. If we look, for example, at the book of Job, where there was great tragedy that happened. But at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, it's ended with families celebrating together, enjoying health and wealth and good food and children and grandchildren all around. So there's this perspective throughout history that children were a help, and sure, they were a help on the farm and an asset and that sort of thing. But I think, again, we see pictures of families celebrating together throughout time and the importance of that and the importance of extended family. And today, that's just gone, or it's somehow a hindrance. Elderly parents are a hindrance. Children are a hindrance. And I think that's something to consider. Is that really truth? Poor women are treated the worst because essentially what we tell poor women is, if you get pregnant, your life is over. You need to not get pregnant because you're poor, and having children will keep you poor. And ultimately, the message I think that comes through with that is that because of your level of income or your lack of wealth, you are not worthy to be a mother. And I feel like that is incredibly damaging to women. Or we imply that one day when you're successful and have pulled yourself out of this hole, which you're going to do all by yourself because you don't need no man, you will be worthy to have a child. But then we don't tell her, but it's going to be really hard to have a kid because biology gets in the way. And well, you're still not going to have enough money to pay for assisted reproductive technologies because that's tens of thousands of dollars. And then also the truth is that there's not babies to adopt either. For every baby that's up for adoption, 30 families want that baby. And yeah, maybe you could foster older children or children who are in need of a home. But again, I really feel like we tell poor women that essentially they're somehow of less value and less worth, and certainly not worthy of having babies. And maybe that's not the message that was meant to come across, but I feel like that is the message that we're sending out there. We're sending out the message that if you do this to all women, you'll ruin your life, you'll destroy your freedom, you'll lose something of who you are, who you were. And then to poor women, you're just completely screwed if you do this. And I think we need to look at that messaging and ask, what are we sending to people? What are we sending to young women? What message are we sending to them? We tell them that having children will seriously derail their lives. And then another question that comes up, and this is a topic that's really close to my heart because of issues that happen in my family, and I have disagreements with family members on this, though I feel like respectfully, because people will ask about, okay, what about rape or incest? And so, I really feel like in that situation, we have 2 victims and we have 2 survivors of that crime and that atrocity. And personally, I believe that either parenting or adoption can be options that honor both of the victims in this situation. And part of that, too, is also coming from my perspective as a birth worker, knowing that when you work with women who have had sexual trauma in their past, that birth can be difficult, but birth can also be a healing experience. And so I don't want to presume that a woman going through that would find her birth to be healing, but I do believe that she could find people to support her through her pregnancy, including mental health professionals as well as her birth team, that could hold the space for that to have a potential, or for that to be a potential outcome for her. So again, I want to say this really sensitively because I know, again, that is terrible being in a situation where with sexual abuse or intrafamilial sexual abuse is a terrible place to be. But I do believe that you have two victims, not one victim in that place. And that when you look at that and ask yourself what's the best outcome for both of those survivors, it may not necessarily be abortion. So it's just a way to think about it and something to consider. And then again, I touched on this already, but what about medical needs? Ectopic pregnancy, mom finds out that she's got cancer or something. And I think, in many ways, this is a tragedy, right? This is a tragic situation because a baby has died during a procedure that is necessary to save the mother's life. And I think that it's especially tragic that a baby who essentially sacrifices his or her life for their mother in this situation, and a mother who is most likely devastated because of this loss. This has been, and I use this language kind of ironically given that I don't like the way it's used societally sometimes, but it's hijacked and certainly appropriated. It is appropriated and spun to serve the narrative of actors who want abortion for any reason. Like they're not talking about a medical procedure to save a woman's life, because those, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, those procedures are already there. They've been there. My mom had her ectopic pregnancy before I was born, decades upon decades ago. They're still there today. Again, I'm a student midwife. We learn about all those sorts of things. If you go interview pro-life doctors, they're not going to leave a woman in that situation. So I feel like this circumstance where you have, again, a baby who's died during a life-saving procedure and a mother who is likely devastated, that tragic situation has been appropriated for an agenda, and it's been appropriated to point fingers at the other side. And that just magnifies the tragedy. It doesn't make anything better. It just magnifies the tragedy of the situation. Another thing that comes up that could be seen as a variant on that is what about mental well-being? And, I do think that mental health today maybe is more tenuous than it was in the past, especially for women. Women's mental health is really poor nowadays compared to the past. And maybe that's a direct result of deleting the legitimacy of being a woman and being feminine. Like you have to compete. Like I said a few minutes ago, like women are supposed to be playboys. They're supposed to compete in the corporate world as if they were men. They're supposed to have careers and balance having children because they're not going to be fulfilled, quote unquote, if they don't have this high power career. Like we are really in a situation where women have an enormous level of pressure on them to perhaps be women and have babies on the side, but mostly to compete and live as men in this man's world. And maybe that's part of what's going on with our mental health. Because I think the question we need to ask is like, not do we need to provide abortions for mental health, but ask why women today have such crummy mental health. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning and what Janine was hinting at. And when I was talking about the poor women, like we're not asking questions about how do we address these systemic problems that women and children face. We're not asking the question, why do women have such poor mental health and what can we do to address that? We're saying that the stopgap measure that's going to make everything better is abortion. And oftentimes, anytime you look at a complex problem and you distill it down to one solution, you can guess that one solution is probably a gross oversimplification. But I feel like especially in this circumstance where we're saying that the one solution is to tell women that they're not worthy financially or mental health-wise or career-wise of being mothers, or that children are not a blessing, or that children will ruin a woman's life. The continuation of the human race is a bad thing. We should realize that we are on the wrong road. We're looking at something in the wrong way. We've oversimplified to the point of being blind. And so, yes, there are so many nuanced and complex issues. And when we distill it all down to, abort all the babies, maybe we should stop and go back and look at these issues and ask, what's really going on here? What's really going on? Because abortion doesn't seem to have improved women's mental health. It hasn't eradicated child poverty. And it hasn't even helped most women to feel more fulfilled in their lives. In fact, and this is not necessarily the direct outcome of abortion, because sometimes I believe this is just from women waiting to have children until they get to that magic point where it's okay. But we have women who are heartbroken because they'll never be mothers. And so we need to go back and say, you know what, this proposed solution may not be the panacea that we said it was going to be. This isn't the end-all be-all. And there are really, really difficult questions to ask in this situation. We need to ask the right questions. And a question to ask, is freedom worth the sacrifice of another's life? Is our freedom worth the sacrifice of another's life? Because and this is where we come back to where I said I felt like women who have a genuine medical complication have been hijacked. Because the question of saving her life is very different from the question is the freedom to live the life or your life the way you think will bring you the most happiness or stability. Those are two different questions. Like, there's one question, which is, if we do this, it will literally save this mother's life. Or if we do this, this will give me a level of freedom that I think will enhance my livelihood and well-being, but not necessarily directly save my life. And so when we wrestle with the question, I think that we should at least discriminate between those two questions and at least say these are two different questions. And even if your conclusion is still, yes, abortion should be available to save a life. And yes, abortion should be available because a woman feels like her life will somehow be negatively impacted by giving birth. Even if you feel like abortion should be allowed in that circumstance, I hope that we can acknowledge that these are two different questions, and they are both questions that are worthy of exploring and answering. And especially when we are asking those questions in the wake of this cradle to the grave male career trajectory, male playboy behavior indoctrination that we have today. You get on the kindergarten to career pipeline, like, basically in preschool for most people these days. And the expectation is that you're going to have a career and that you're going to go out and be in a man's world and that you're going to shatter the glass ceilings and that you're going to be a playboy and live it up while you do it. And the reality is that most women find that very stressful. Most women do not find that they feel fulfilled by this playboy thing. In the book that I honestly cannot remember the name of the book right now, but I'm going to link to it in the show notes. But it's a book that looks at, has this kind of, has the sexual revolution really benefited women? And she talks about in the book that there's this girl who's been living with this man and, they've been, I guess, lovers, but she's upset at him because he tells her that she's not girlfriend material. And I'm like, you're living with this woman, you're sleeping with this woman, and yet you're going to tell her that she's not girlfriend material, and then you're going to go ask your buddy, why did she get upset about that? I think that's a very good illustration of the difference between the way that men and women think and the way that they look at relationships. And I know that's a blanket statement, and it's not going to be the same. Like, some guys are going to be much more sensitive instead of jerks. But, and many, for many men, there is a level of connection, but it's still like, it's just biologically different. And when we expect women to basically be men in the world today, and then I just feel like we're doing a great, great disservice to women, and that also we need to realize that we are asking these questions after we have literally spent a young woman's full lifespan telling her that the way she's going to be fulfilled is by living like a playboy and having a high-power career. So this is literally like what she is being indoctrinated in. Because family is something that comes after all of that. It comes after your years of being a playboy. It comes after your years of career success. And what we don't tell women is by the time you get to that after, number one, you may not be able to find a partner. And number two, if you do, you may not be able to have a baby. But this is kind of like an accessory. And so we have to ask these questions being cognizant of the fact that this is what we've indoctrinated women in. And maybe if we go back and look at that reality and also ask ourselves, is that really? Some women are going to want that, but most women are not. Statistically speaking, it seems like about 5% of women go through their lives not really wanting to have children. And we have some, like I fully believe, I think, that there's been some talk in the news about people making fun of single people throughout history and or saying, single people. And I don't share that viewpoint, because you look at what, single or childless individuals have done, and many of them have done great things for our world. Like I read my children a storybook about Gregor Mendel the other day. He's the one who figured out genetics through peas. And it was a really profound story, and just to think of what he did for humanity with that. He lived in a religious order and didn't have children. So, we're not going to discount him because he was childless, or women like, I mentioned Amelia Earhart and Joan of Arc and Florence Nightingale and Mother Teresa and all these women who have done great things and who stayed childless. But these are the minority of women. And there are some women who have a mission that's very passionate. I mean, I feel like I have a mission that's very passionate to talk about pregnancy, birth, and babies, and apparently other heavy topics. But, I want to respect and hold space for women who make that choice, but also acknowledge the reality that for most women, that is not it. They do not think they want to have children, or some of them think that they do in their early 20s and then get to their early 30s, and all of a sudden, like, that biological clock is like, hello, mama. But most women from the outset know they want to have kids one day. They just mistakenly believe that all of this other stuff comes first. And so this is the generation and generations that we're, that we're building upon when we ask these questions. And then we wonder, mental health isn't bad because of lack of access to abortion. I think mental health is bad because we've sold women a package of lies about the fact that they need to be exactly like men in order to be fulfilled. And when they try and do that and balance the desire to mother, it's really hard. It's really hard. So, I guess I'm just looking over my notes because I think we even have this attitude today that humanity is a problem. Like, we shouldn't have babies, we're harming the earth. And I think if you go back and listen to the 2 episodes that I did on pronatalism and then what pronatalism means for women, I talk about that a lot there. But I feel like maybe we've just poisoned the pot ourselves. If you spend decades telling a woman that having a child is going to ruin her chance to get ahead or to have success and fulfillment, you've kind of poisoned your own pot there. And that, I feel like, too, another thing, and I've touched on this in episodes even in the far past, but I feel like that narrative continues in pregnancy and birth. Like, the paradigm that we have for pregnancy and birth today is mother versus baby. And I feel like that's the paradigm that is our general cultural narrative, is that woman versus baby. Baby is going to hold you back. And it continues in pregnancy, especially in the medical model of birth, like it's mother versus baby. Like somehow this baby is dangerous, or you and your body are dangerous to your baby. We're not looking at it like as a holistic mama baby. And I think I could spend an entire podcast episode talking about that. And I know, like I said, I've talked about that before. But I just think that this kind of toxic attitude spills over even into obstetrics, where it's supposed to be about mothers and babies, and it's supposed to be about honoring the design and the wisdom of women's bodies to carry their babies and to birth their babies. And as I talked about in the last episode, I feel like it's supposed to be about the spiritual journey of who you become as a mother, which is still you, but is a richer, stronger, more beautiful version of you. And the strengths that brings, and all of that is just divorced. It's just gone from our conversations. And there's just no honor there for the bringing forth of new life, for mothers and babies, for the connectedness and the interconnectedness and the inherent good of that interconnectedness, for the fact that most mothers want to just be with their babies. I think, I haven't had a little baby for almost 7 years now. And I think about just the joy that I gained from nursing my baby, cuddling my baby, but even just changing my baby's clothes. Do you want to know what's so funny? Like, just, I think that some of this is just inherent to little ones. I bought a dish rack, right? Because I want to use my grandma's china for some meals. and it can't go in the dishwasher. And so I bought a dish rack just for plates so that on the nights we use the china plates, we can just wash those. And it's just this little fold up thing, so it opens up like this. And I took it out of the box and just set it, I'd opened up the box on the floor, and I think I was engaged with another child. And I look back over, and there's a laundry basket of folded laundry. One of my daughters has taken the folded laundry, her brother's folded t-shirts, and lined the dish rack and brought a baby doll and placed it in there and the dish rack has a little cup rack that folds out on the bottom, and she's placed the baby doll's toys and has covered the baby doll up and is playing baby doll, in this like little dish rack manger. And I was just like, that's such a little girl thing. I'm not saying that a little boy would never do that or that all little girls do that, but again, there's just this nurturing, this drive, this enjoyment. Like many women choose to be stay-at-home moms after they have their baby because they can't imagine being away from their baby. You got women who are crying on TikTok and Instagram because they're going back to work and somehow they're being told to just buck it up, you'll get through this. Everybody feels this way, and maybe we should ask ourselves if this is really normal. That we're asking women to basically take their heart out to conform to this societal expectation and this societal kind of spirit or attitude. And maybe that whole attitude is the problem. Not so much. Maybe not so much that women are too poor. Is it right to tell women that they're unworthy of motherhood just because they're poor? Or that somehow they're wrong to bring a baby into the world? And if we value the lives of minorities so much, why are their rates of abortion so high? Why do we tell them that the solution is to kill their babies rather than to create supportive networks, rather than to improve maternal infant health? Why is the narrative death to that group if we value it so much? And yes, this does go back to some of the beginning, like Margaret Sanger and the beginning of birth control and that sort of thing. And if you look and read that material, eugenics are part of what's behind it. And is that spirit still somewhat there? Can we really say that it's gone? I think these are hard questions, and we need to ask ourselves. So, I think we need to look at, if I look at me and say, what am I, Kristen? I'm pro-family policies. I'm pro-community activism. I am pro-social nets. I really struggle with people who say that the position is to remove all social safety nets, because I think that does not help mothers and babies. I'm pro being supportive of moms who have had a baby, without being married. I'm pro mothers of many. I am one of those, of course. I'm pro education. I am pro long maternity leaves. I'm also pro moms staying home. I am pro honoring the mother as much as the maiden. And I am pro honoring the wisdom of women who are in that crone phase of life. I am pro-feminine. I am pro looking at pregnancy and birth as something sacred that offers a gift to women. I'm anti-hookup culture. I do feel pro-marriage, even if I know there's reasons that marriages have to end. And again, I'm just really pro-family and community safety nets. I.e., if somebody told me I feel like I can't keep this baby because I can't support that baby, I would rather support that mother and baby financially, do as much as I could to do that. And this is something that I have felt as a single mother in the wake of abuse, and looking at how hard, and so this makes me feel emotional, looking at how hard it is to find people who will support you without skepticism or who won't look down upon you. And I do think that is a big problem in our society today. And I feel like that's one reason why, even if I would say, I'm a conservative Christian, Messianic Gentile, whatever you want to say, I would say that I really feel like we need to have social safety nets, because so much of what safety nets would have been in the past, which is family or church or something like that, has been eroded. So I feel like at least until we rebuild those safety nets, we need to have some level of safety net, like the WIC program or something like that, for moms and babies, and for moms who find themselves, who are left single moms, not because of making the decision that they just wanted to try something new, but because of abuse or mental health instability or something like that. I feel like we need to provide a comprehensive level of support. But I also feel like we can't have good conversations about what that looks like as long as the societal default assumption is oh, those babies are going to be aborted, so we don't need to have that conversation because those babies just shouldn't be in existence anyways. Like, until we change that narrative, we can't have conversations about how to really address injustices like that. You know, I will say that another thing that you learn as a mother of many, and also that I've learned as someone who's gone through like inestimable trauma, generational traumas, is you hold lightly and you walk carefully beside someone, even if their viewpoints differ. I recognize that so very many women differ in opinion from me, and I have had to make hard and terrible choices in my life. I have faced hard and terrible things. I've watched many people that I love make choices that bring them, and even me, great amounts of pain, even unto the point of death. And I don't think that my days of facing pain and suffering are over. And that gives me a couple of perspectives. One is that life comes with many moments of chaos and suffering, and that it also has many moments of joy and light. I feel that every human has the right to walk that path. And it is not up to me to decide if life is going to be too hard for another. It also lends me the perspective that I want to be open to walking beside someone, even if they have made choices that I do not agree with. I have to hold some of my boundaries, and at times I have to share that I don't agree with someone, even while I'm there to walk in love. This is an agonizingly difficult topic that I believe has become so heated by the current narratives that are sold to women. Not all termination is the same. Babies lost in procedures to save mothers' lives are a tragedy, not a choice. The current narrative obscures and even weaponizes these situations for their own agenda. And that agenda circles around this larger narrative that children are a burden, that they are an unnecessary sacrifice, and that they hold women hostage or rob them of meaningful lives. That's what I'm opposed to. That's why I believe in walking beside women no matter what choice that they've made. Because we are so caught up in this cradle to the grave campaign to convince women that they're victims of their fertility, that their ability to give life will lead to death, like some, proverbial death, if not literal. So how can women see otherwise? I guess if nothing else, I hope that this episode helps you see the deep thought that goes into this, and that this isn't a blanket thing, and it's certainly not mother versus baby, because that's the exact lie that we've been fed. That somehow, shaping female sexuality to serve hypersexual men is what it means to champion women's rights. We've been fed a complete lie. I think this is crushing. It's crushing for women, it's crushing for babies, and it's crushing for mothers. And I guess my biggest prayer is that we would walk this out very gently.